In 2015, Joshua gained admission into Anambra State University, a milestone that marked the beginning of his journey into adulthood. Like many fresh students, he was filled with a mix of excitement and anxiety. However, his anxiety wasn't just about schoolwork or adapting to a new environment, it stemmed from a deeper awareness. Long before he ever set foot on campus, Joshua had heard unsettling stories about student cult groups, their brutal rivalries, and how innocent lives had been caught in the crossfire. These tales shaped his mindset long before matriculation, making him unusually cautious. To those around him, he often joked that he would stick to wearing traditional outfits like Ankara once on campus, a harmless way, he thought, to appear neutral and avoid attracting the attention of any of the groups that operated in the shadows. But underneath the humor was a real fear, the fear of being dragged into something far bigger than himself. Upon arriving at school, Joshua was immediately confronted by the harsh realities of campus life. Finding a decent place to live was stressful and draining. Navigating the maze-like layout of the school while trying to locate his faculty left him mentally exhausted. Nothing about the transition was smooth. Eventually, he found accommodation in an off-campus hostel and was paired with a second-year student named Charles. Charles was sharp, composed, and known for his academic excellence. He was the type of roommate any new student would be lucky to have. Things seemed to be stabilizing until Joshua began noticing a regular visitor to their lodge. The student, known by the nickname 99, carried an aura of fear and respect wherever he went. His demeanor was intense, and his reputation preceded him. It didn't take long for Joshua to realize that 99 was deeply involved in one of the most notorious confraternity groups on campus, the Supreme Vikings Confraternity. Over time, 99 began taking a peculiar interest in Joshua. He would often come around, make small talk, and gradually shift the conversation toward topics that hinted at recruitment. He appeared convinced that Joshua had the right qualities for their group, that he was confident, smart, and bold enough to be part of them. But Joshua wasn't moved. The warnings and stories he had heard before ever gaining admission came back to him with full force. He had no interest in such a path and tried, in his own way, to distance himself. Eventually, 99 invited Joshua to attend a social event. Wanting to keep things calm, Joshua gave a vague assurance, but deep down, he knew he wasn't going to show up. When the event came and went without his presence, the reaction was swift and bitter. Not long after, on a quiet evening, unsettling sounds filled the hostel compound. Loud voices, threatening tones, and the unmistakable tension of an approaching confrontation hung in the air. Members of the Vikings confraternity had gathered outside the hostel. The atmosphere was charged and hostile. Their presence wasn't casual, they had come looking for someone, and that someone was Joshua. Inside his room, Joshua's heart pounded as he listened. But unknown to the Vikings, the majority of residents in that particular hostel were affiliated with a rival group, the Maphites. As the situation escalated, these rival members intervened. Their presence alone was enough to prevent the confrontation from spilling into violence that night. The Vikings eventually left, but the incident sent a chilling message. By morning, the Maphite members who lived in the hostel approached Joshua. They wanted answers. Their tone was serious and their concern real. They asked him to explain what connection he had to the group that had come in such an aggressive manner the night before. Joshua, still visibly shaken, gave a clear and honest account. He explained that he had turned down several approaches and had no ties with them. He hadn't joined their ranks, and the tension was simply a result of his refusal. Even though the Maphites accepted his explanation, Joshua knew that it would be unwise to remain in that hostel. The fear of a second visit haunted him. Without making noise about it, he gathered a few belongings and moved in temporarily with a friend named Jeff, who stayed in another part of town. Jeff was a laid-back guy, accommodating and cheerful. But there was something Joshua didn't fully grasp at first. Jeff was affiliated with the Buccaneers confraternity. At first, the new environment seemed peaceful. Joshua felt like he could finally breathe and regain his balance. Then came another twist. One day, while staying at Jeff's place, Joshua grabbed a shirt from the wardrobe without giving it much thought. It was just a shirt to him, something casual to wear while stepping out briefly. What he didn't realize was that the shirt had specific patterns and symbols associated with Jeff's group. They were subtle, but unmistakable to anyone familiar with the group. Later that day, while moving around the compound, Joshua attracted attention. A few members of the Buccaneers spotted the symbols on the shirt and stopped him. Their demeanor shifted quickly from curiosity to confrontation. To them, a stranger wearing that particular shirt raised questions. Joshua tried to explain, but the situation escalated. Words were exchanged, and soon, it turned physical. It wasn't a severe beating, but it was rough and humiliating enough to send a clear warning. Joshua realized, once again, that in the world of campus politics and secret affiliations, even an innocent mistake could carry heavy consequences. After the incident, he quietly returned to his old hostel, shaken but wiser. His experiences had taught him a harsh lesson, that surviving campus life wasn't just about passing exams or avoiding trouble. It was about staying alert, knowing where not to be, and learning quickly how a single misstep could drag an innocent person into chaos. When Joshua returned to his hostel after the unpleasant incident at Jeff's place, he kept a low profile. He walked through the gates quietly, avoiding eye contact with most of the residents. The fear of running into more trouble lingered in his chest like a weight. He knew he couldn't keep drifting from one place to another, but returning to that lodge felt like walking back into a storm that hadn't quite passed. To his surprise, things were calmer than he expected. The same faces that once watched him with suspicion now treated him with indifference, or in some cases, quiet sympathy. A few days passed in relative peace, no confrontation, no threats. Then, one afternoon, a figure approached him just outside the lodge. It was O.C. Bobo, a popular student in the hostel. He was one of those who had intervened the night the Vikings came storming the compound. Joshua had seen him around before, always commanding respect without saying much. O.C. wasn't loud or boastful, but everyone knew he had deep ties to the Maphite confraternity, a group that many considered one of the most organized and dominant on campus. O.C. started a casual conversation with Joshua, asking how he was holding up. At first, Joshua gave short answers. But gradually, he opened up. He told O.C. everything, how he had left the hostel to stay with a friend, how that friend turned out to be part of another group, and how a simple mistake had led to him being humiliated by members of that group. He spoke with a voice that was calm on the surface but laced with frustration. O.C. listened patiently, nodding as if the story was all too familiar. After Joshua finished, O.C. offered a perspective Joshua hadn't considered before. He told him that things like that happened because, in places like that campus, power and protection often determined how one was treated. It wasn't always about who was right or wrong, it was about belonging. He explained that some groups didn't have much weight within that particular school, and being around them didn't offer much of a shield. But if Joshua had been affiliated with something stronger, like the Maphites, things might have turned out differently. That conversation marked a turning point. Joshua had always been wary of campus confraternities. But that day, as he listened to O.C., something shifted in his mind. He began to wonder if staying neutral and trying to avoid trouble was even possible in a place like this. Maybe, he thought, the only real way to survive, to gain respect, to avoid being harassed, was to become part of something bigger. Days later, O.C. brought up the idea again. He spoke with confidence and assurance, describing the brotherhood, the loyalty, and the sense of protection the Maphites offered their own. Eventually, after thinking deeply, Joshua agreed. The first step was simple, at least on the surface. He was given a small task, to buy some candles. There was no elaborate ceremony, no crowd, just a quiet instruction. It was the beginning of something bigger, though he didn't know it at the time. That evening, when he returned with the items, a brief session was held. It wasn't physically challenging, but it carried weight. The moment was symbolic, a signal that he had stepped into unfamiliar territory. After that first stage, O.C. pulled him aside and gave him a warning, don't go around looking for trouble. He explained that this was only the beginning, and Joshua hadn't yet earned full status within the group. For now, he was still in a delicate position, halfway in, halfway out. There would be no formal orientation yet, no detailed briefing on codes or responsibilities. That would come later, after he had proven himself through the full rites. A few days passed. Joshua went about his day quietly, following OC's advice and staying off the radar. Then, on a Friday evening, OC told him and Charles, Joshua's roommate, who had also agreed to follow the same path, to get ready. It was time for the final phase. They followed OC as the sun dipped behind the trees, casting long shadows across the campus. The group moved silently, staying clear of busy roads and open spaces. Eventually, they reached a quiet, forested area on the outskirts of town, a place far removed from student activity. This, OC said, was the site for the full initiation. That night was unlike anything Joshua had experienced before. The setting was raw and isolated. The group members present took the event seriously. There were no jokes, no distractions, just a deep sense of ceremony and expectation. The process was intense, designed to test both mental and physical endurance. It wasn't just about participation, it was about commitment, loyalty, and the willingness to carry a new identity. By the time it was over, Joshua felt completely different. Exhausted, yes, but also transformed. A line had been crossed. He had made a choice, and there was no turning back. After the rites, OC, now his official guide within the group, referred to as his godfather, handed Joshua a document known among the members as a CV. It wasn't a real curriculum vitae, but a symbolic paper that outlined certain values and expectations. It included a name he would be known by within the group and the pledge he was expected to live by. Standing among the members, Joshua was led through a final act of allegiance. It wasn't public, but it was powerful. He was asked to repeat certain words, to commit himself to the values of the group, and to promise loyalty to his brothers. When it was done, he was no longer an outsider. He had become a full member of the Maphite confraternity. In the days that followed, things began to change. Joshua noticed how people looked at him differently. Those who once ignored him now greeted him with nods. The same lodge that once felt unsafe now became familiar and secure. Though the path he had chosen came with its own dangers, he had crossed into a world where respect, fear, and loyalty blended into something he was still learning to understand. But for now, Joshua was no longer just a student. He had become part of a system, one that would shape his journey on campus in ways he could never have predicted. After Joshua completed his full initiation into the Maphite confraternity, he began to adjust to the new life he had chosen. His roommate, Charles, who had gone through the same process alongside him, was also trying to settle into this new reality. At first, both of them moved carefully and kept to themselves, observing and learning. They now belonged to something that gave them a sense of security, and with it came a new kind of respect on campus. People looked at them differently. Their words carried more weight. Their steps seemed firmer. But it didn't take long before Charles started to feel the pressure. The excitement of belonging to a powerful group had worn off quickly for him. The responsibilities, the secrecy, and the tension that came with it began to weigh heavily on his heart. He missed the quietness of normal student life, the books, the early morning lectures, the simple joy of studying without fear. One evening, while in their room, Charles opened up to Joshua. His voice was low, cautious, and full of regret. He admitted that he was already tired of the confraternity lifestyle and wanted to quietly walk away from it all. He just wanted to focus on his studies and return to a life of peace. Joshua listened carefully. Though he, too, sometimes felt the pressure, he understood the dangers that came with speaking such thoughts out loud. With a serious tone, he warned Charles never to mention that intention to anyone else, not even to those they thought they could trust. In that world, such talk could be taken as betrayal, and betrayal came with consequences. Days later, an incident occurred that would turn Joshua's life upside down. It was a calm afternoon. Joshua had left the hostel to run a few errands. He was walking alone through a part of campus when he was approached by a well-known student who went by the name Bango. Bango wasn't just any student, he had a fierce reputation. He was affiliated with another powerful confraternity group, the Black Axe, and was known for his intimidating presence. Many students gave him space and avoided confrontation. But Joshua, now a full-fledged member of the Maphites, didn't feel the same fear others did. When Bango approached him, it was clear what his intentions were. He tried to assert dominance, speaking in a harsh tone and trying to pressure Joshua into handing over his phone or anything valuable he was carrying. But Joshua, who had once lived in fear of such moments, now stood his ground. He spoke back with confidence, even raising his voice in defiance. Bango didn't take it lightly. The conversation quickly escalated. Without much warning, Bango became aggressive and physically attacked Joshua. In a flash, he overpowered him, snatched his phone, and walked away, leaving Joshua bruised and humiliated. Burning with anger, Joshua returned to his hostel. He went straight to the room of his godfather, O.C. Bobo, and explained everything. He recounted how he was approached, what Bango did, and how helpless he had felt despite now being part of a brotherhood. O.C. Bobo listened carefully. He didn't say much, but his face grew tense. He nodded and told Joshua to leave the matter to him. The next morning, whispers began to travel across the campus. There was tension in the air. Students spoke in hushed voices about something that had happened overnight. The news spread quickly. Bango, the feared Black Axe member, had been shot and brought down. No one had details of how it happened or who was involved, but everyone knew it wasn't random. Later that morning, Joshua went to visit O.C. Bobo's room again. As he entered, his eyes caught something on the table, his missing phone. O.C. Bobo looked at him and simply gestured for him to collect it. Then, with a serious tone, he gave Joshua a piece of advice that felt more like a command. He had to leave town immediately. Joshua didn't ask questions. He understood what was at stake. The incident wasn't just personal anymore. It had sparked a bigger problem, the kind that could set off a chain reaction. Without delay, he packed a small bag, grabbed a few essential items, and left the hostel. Charles, already weary of the confraternity lifestyle, didn't hesitate either. He also packed his things and left, but unlike Joshua, he went straight home. When Charles arrived at home, he could no longer keep the burden to himself. The fear, the guilt, and the chaos he had witnessed were too much for him. He sat his parents down and confessed everything. He told them how he had been initiated into the Maphite confraternity, how his roommate Joshua had also been involved, and how O.C. Bobo, the same student who guided them into the group, had taken action that forced them to flee campus. He left no detail out. Charles's father, deeply disturbed by the story, immediately involved the authorities. He believed something had to be done before things got worse. A formal report was filed, and soon after, a team of officers raided the student hostel where O.C. Bobo and other members of the group were known to reside. However, by the time they arrived, the entire place had been emptied. It seemed word had already reached the Maphite group about the police action. They had vanished before the raid, likely anticipating not just a visit from the authorities but a retaliatory strike from the Black Axe as well. None of the key members, including O.C. Bobo, were found. Unfortunately, the absence of the real targets didn't stop the authorities from taking action. Some students who had no connection to any of the groups were rounded up and taken away. They were innocent, caught in the middle of a dangerous situation they had nothing to do with. Back on campus, fear filled the air. The balance of power had been shaken, and students walked carefully, speaking less, watching more. Joshua, now in hiding, realized that the decision he had once made for protection had placed him in even deeper waters. Charles, too, regretted ever accepting the invitation that had led him into a world filled with silence, secrets, and survival. Though they were now far from campus, both young men knew that their journey was far from over. The fallout from the incident that led to Bango's demise sent ripples across the entire university community. News of what had happened traveled quickly, not just among students, but also within the school administration and the authorities outside campus. Within days, O.C. Bobo, the once respected figure within the Maphite confraternity, became a name that carried heavy consequences. The school management officially declared him wanted, and reports circulated that security operatives were also on his trail. When O.C. Bobo heard what had happened, particularly how the details had leaked to the school and law enforcement, he was deeply troubled, not just because of the consequences, but because of who had betrayed him. Word soon got back to him that it was Charles, the same Charles he had guided through the rites of the group, the same one who had once called him Godfather. O.C. Bobo couldn't believe it. To him, it felt like betrayal of the highest order. Faced with rising heat from both within and outside the campus, OC Bobo vanished from sight. For weeks, no one could say exactly where he was. His room was empty, his phone switched off, and all communication had been cut off. The tension that followed his disappearance gripped the lodge where the Maphites once lived. No one was sure what would happen next. About 3 weeks passed. Slowly, the fear that once filled the air began to thin. The noise surrounding the incident quieted down. No formal peace meeting was held between the Maphites and the Black Axe group, the silence that was more dangerous than words. It meant that grudges still lingered, waiting for a moment to resurface. Charles, who had now been labeled a betrayer by members of his former group, made a move to avoid further confrontation. He abandoned the private hostel where he once stayed and moved into one of the school's official hostels. He left behind many of his belongings, taking only essentials. His goal was simple: disappear into the crowd and start over. Joshua, on the other hand, was still moving around campus, quietly, cautiously, and with growing awareness. He suspected that the Black Axe members hadn't been able to tie him to the event involving Bangor, especially since it was OC Bobo who had taken the lead. But something deep inside him refused to feel fully safe. He adopted a personal security habit, never taking the same path twice in a day. If he went to class through one road, he returned through another. If he sensed anyone following him, he detoured. He didn't share his routines with anyone, not even close friends. Despite all his precautions, nothing could prepare him for what was coming next. It was a Sunday morning, calm like any other. Joshua had just finished preparing to attend a nearby fellowship when a student rushed past his window, speaking in a panicked tone. Word spread fast: 3 students had lost their lives in an early morning clash. Everyone was talking about it. At first, there was confusion. But as more details surfaced, it became clearer. Joshua immediately went to the residence of one of the senior Maphite members to confirm what had happened. When he arrived, the mood was grim. The air was heavy. Inside, faces were tight with emotion, a mix of grief and anger. It was revealed that 2 of the students involved were active members of the Maphite group. The third was not a member at all, just an innocent friend who happened to be with them at the wrong place and wrong time. The attack had come from a hit squad affiliated with the Black Axe group, a retaliatory strike in response to the loss of their own member, Bangor. It was brutal, precise, and meant to send a clear message. The mood within the Maphite camp shifted immediately. What had started as quiet mourning turned into determination. They could not let it go unanswered. Later that night, a few members of the Maphite, including Joshua, moved quietly toward the residence of a known member of the Black Axe group. The target was not just anyone, he was a coursemate of Joshua's. Someone he had sat beside in class. Someone he had exchanged notes with. But in that moment, the weight of personal history meant little. The Maphite group acted swiftly. The student was attacked in his own home, and by morning, the news of his death spread just like the others before him. The campus had entered a new phase of silence, not the peaceful kind, but the type that feels like a calm before a storm. Many students stayed indoors. Others left campus entirely. A cloud of fear settled across lecture halls and hostels. But within all this chaos, another event was unfolding quietly. Charles, now branded a traitor by his former brothers, had thought that moving into the school hostel would give him safety. But the Maphites had not forgotten. They believed he had played a key role in exposing OC Bobo and putting their entire network at risk. As days passed, they began tracking his movements. Slowly, they gathered information: where he stayed, where he hung out, and who he moved with. One evening, they made their move. Charles was apprehended quietly, away from public view. What followed was not quick. He was confronted, questioned, and accused of betraying the brotherhood he once pledged loyalty to. He denied what he could, but the verdict had already been decided before the confrontation even began. Charles was eventually killed by those who had once called him brother. His choice to walk away, to speak to his family, and to open up to authorities, a decision born from fear and regret, had sealed his fate. News of his death reached students the next day. Many were shocked. Some felt pity. Others stayed silent. No one dared to ask too many questions. For Joshua, it was a haunting reminder of the road he had walked into. In just a few weeks, he had seen friendships dissolve, trust turn into betrayal, and lives lost, all under the weight of choices made in search of protection. He was still alive. But deep down, he knew the story was far from over.